Staying regulated in a neurotypical world is one of the great challenges for autistic people, and the impact on our mental health can be profound. Well, we have got a heap of questions on that very topic, and Dr. Beth is here to answer them. What are you most excited about tackling today, Dr. Beth?
I think we should tackle the things that tackle us when we are least expecting it. So how about we talk about meltdowns and shutdowns and burnout?
Welcome, my stars of Orion. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Orion Kelly, that autistic guy. I'm all about providing validation and support for autistic people and their loved ones. Episode 2 of a brand new series we're calling Ask Dr. Beth, where we bring your real-life questions to an absolute expert in the field of neurodiversity, Dr. Beth Radulski. She is a neurodivergent coach, educator, consultant, and she's autistic. Welcome back, Dr. Beth.
I'm so happy to be here again. Hi, everyone.
How are you feeling after your introduction to the world that is my channel? How are you feeling? Did the community treat you nicely? Are you going to be okay? Are you happy? Are you excited? Do you have any feedback to the community? How are you?
I am doing really well. I was really overwhelmed with how nice everybody's comments were and how many more questions came streaming in. So I love reading the comments and I love replying to them. So thank you, everyone, for the nice words. And I look forward to hearing from more of you, hopefully.
Okay, see. Rookie, huh? She likes replying to all the comments. Rookie mistake. She shouldn't have said that ever. Like, do you know how many comments I get every day? Do you know how many comments? All right, shut up with the replying to every comment, Beth. You're killing me. Jesus. All right. I would never sleep. I mean, honestly. All right. Whatever. You're better than me already. Good for you. Okay, let's get on to the questions here because we want to get started. This is seriously probably one of the biggest topics that affects autistic people: mental health, meltdowns, shutdowns, burnout, and everything in between, because really we're just trying to fight dysregulation in a world that's basically constantly trying to dysregulate us. So let's start with DJ Daz, and it's, why do some neurodivergent people implode when others explode, and how can you prevent meltdowns?
So these are really great questions. And I think a good place to start here is by defining meltdowns and shutdowns and burnout to try to help get to the crux of why some people explode and some people implode. So meltdowns are basically a feeling of being extremely overwhelmed by the intensity of external stimuli. So this could be sensory overstimulation, it could be really intense emotional stimulation, it could be executive functioning demands that are building up and you're trying to get out the door because you have to catch your bus and you're running late and it's really stressful. And it kind of just boils over a little bit. And for some people, this can look like an outward explosion, as you said. It can be needing to scream or shout or punch a pillow or stim, just kind of trying to regulate and get some of that feeling of overwhelm and intensity out of your body. For some people, it can look more like an implosion, which we would kind of refer to as a shutdown. So I don't know if anyone remembers old computers in the 90s and early 2000s. There was an operating system that was called Windows NT. You may remember an issue called the blue screen of death. And the blue screen of death, I see you, Orion. I know you had Windows NT. The blue screen of death was basically like, your computer is so overwhelmed and so overstimulated. Like, we are past the point of like Control-Alt-Delete, of opening a task manager, of trying to close things down. It can't even understand that you're like trying to hit Control-Alt-Delete. Like, it's gone. And it would just pop up this big blue flash that was called the blue screen of death. And that was it. The only way to interact with your computer again was to completely turn it off and reboot it. So I understand an implosion or a shutdown as kind of, you've gone into blue screen of death mode. Like, it's over. You're not understanding what people are saying to you. You're not able to process external stimuli. You're not even able to process your internal stimuli of your emotions or anything else. And you kind of implode in on yourself. And we may just need to kind of hide under a blanket in a dark room until we feel like we're ready to reboot again. Some people might have those kind of meltdowns. Like, you might think of a computer steaming and smoking and melting down because things just got too heated. Some people might have more of like a blue screen of death shutdown. Some people can vary depending on what the experience is or what location they're in. Some people might learn to mask their meltdowns and turn them into something that looks more like a shutdown. And then the third definition we were going to talk about is burnout. And burnout is really, I think, probably one of the best quotes is from an article by Raymaker et al. From 2020, and it's right in the title of their article. It's, quote, having all of your internal resources exhausted beyond measure and having no cleaning crew. It can be similar to meltdowns and shutdowns, and that the demands of the external environment outweigh your capacity to cope with them. But the difference with burnout is if this is happening repeatedly and significantly across time, it can lead to a really intense fatigue, exhaustion, and inability to cope. And it can look a lot like depression on the surface if people don't know what to look for in terms of autistic burnout specifically. So you might need to sleep more, you might be exhausted, you might be sad, you might get frustrated with yourself and have lower self-esteem because why can't I do this the way everyone else is doing it? So it can look a lot like depression, but it's distinct. And some of the kind of precursors are not having enough support, telling people, this is coming through really strongly in the research, telling people, you know, I need help, I need support, and almost being gaslit a little bit. Everyone has hard days sometimes. Everyone else can do this. Why are you so special? Why do you need to work from home, or why would you need your own office? The external environment just diminishes our needs to the point that we burn out and we can't cope anymore. So those are the kind of key definitions for those three. And what do you think, Orion? Do we need to add anything to that?
No, I love that. I just wanted to ask you really quickly. This can be like, one-word answer if you need it to be. But like, is it fair to say that burnouts are only manifestations of a series of or too many of unmitigated meltdowns and shutdowns? As in, you don't go straight to burnout. Am I right or wrong?
That may be a contributing factor. So I think with burnout, it's not like, you're just having one bad experience at work and you come home tired and you sleep it off and next day you feel a lot better. It's not going to happen quickly like that. The research that's coming out on burnout, and I want to be clear, burnout is a really early and young field of research. But what we do know so far is showing us that burnout tends to occur specifically like we just spoke about, where we have these external demands that are different than what our internal demands are. There's a mismatch there. And it's happening systematically over time and slowly building up until the point where we kind of hit a tipping point. And that tipping point can look like losing skills that we had. You might have been managing to go to work every day and come home and cook dinner. And then at some point, it becomes a bowl of cereal, not just for one day, but every day. So you can actually start to lose adult life skills, for example, that you'd had if you are an adult, or if you're a child, it might look like missing milestones and losing milestones. So it's a pattern over time.
And it's a great analogy too used earlier with the computer. And I think what's fascinating to me is, sometimes computers crash and reboot themselves. I feel like, and you've got to just wait. I feel like that's in a way very much, like an outward meltdown. And then when the computer kind of freezes and you choose to restart it, I feel like that's almost like an internal meltdown where you're silently able to kind of like just stop and start again. But I've always loved that idea because people think you can just snap out of it or just stop it. But of course, if you use the example, well, go ahead, restart your computer and then tell me you can start working on it a second after you've hit restart. You can't. That's not how it works. So I think, for parents and for carers and for partners of autistic people, looking at dysregulation manifesting in meltdowns and shutdowns and these types of things as a computer crashing and restarting itself or restarting a computer. It takes time to get itself back into working order. And I think, those kind of analogies, they're super helpful. I don't care if you're a parent, or you're a partner. I think they're super helpful. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think it can be really helpful. I remember talking about this a long time ago on TikTok. And one of the ways that I was trying to explain it is how do we ask our loved ones, like you were just mentioning, how do we ask them to help us? And one of the ways they can help in this situation is to stop giving us more external stimuli. Because oftentimes when people help, they'll say, what do you need? do you want this or this or this or this? And they'll start listing things and trying to get involved and try to help us, which is coming from a very good place. But for us, it's as if they're opening another program and another program and another program, and our demands on ourselves are already too much, and they're becoming more. So sometimes asking big questions can just make it worse. It can help with your loved ones to actually have a plan on how to handle this before it happens. And if it does happen, it's just lead me into the bedroom, put me in bed, turn the lights off, close the blinds, and come back in half an hour and ask if I'm okay.
100%. I mean, look, I think questions are the absolute worst case scenario, big or small. Just don't ever go near questions. I just don't like the idea of them at that point in time. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. So we have here Malaka's Corner. I don't know. I feel like I've sworn in 7 languages now. We'll just move on. I have left numerous jobs due to sudden, irrational, emotional meltdowns that seem to be triggered by the smallest things. Is there a way to see this coming and nip it in the bud? I've also tried very hard to internalise meltdowns only to go into severe depression and burnout. Interesting to know which one it actually would be. It's a serious issue that's plagued me for over 40 years. Any thoughts would be helpful?
So great question. And I think the first thing to note is that, because we spoke a little bit about depression and burnout in the previous question, it is important to note a lot of autistic people have co-occurring depression in addition to being autistic. So it's not that autistic people can't have depression or don't get depressed. Burnouts are distinct from depression, but they can co-occur. So that's the first thing I want to note, because I think that's really important. But in terms of how to recognize this and nip it in the bud, I think it really takes a kind of proactive approach and a very systematic approach, and that it's not just going to be you recognizing your emotional state and then stopping it. We need to understand why that emotional state, why that state of intense overwhelm is happening. What are the triggers over time? Like, can you notice any patterns, and how do you plan for it? So I like to kind of think of this in my week-to-week life as almost the same way I would look at a weather report, right? You're going to look at your calendar, you're going to understand what you've got on that week, and you're going to plan. The same way, if you know there's rain, you can plan to bring an umbrella. If you know there's snow, you can bring your winter coat. If you know there's sun, you can bring your hat or your sunscreen. That's how we need to think about protecting our emotional state and our internal regulation as autistic people or neurodivergent people. So what can that look like practically? Well, let's say I know I have a major social event on Sunday, and I'm going to be going into the week a little bit tired. I might plan for spending whatever time I'm not at that social event Sunday. I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm not going to go into a really loud cafe and have breakfast before I go and have this overstimulating event in the afternoon. The rest of that day is rest time. I'm going to reserve my energy and preserve it as much as possible for this event later on. Then I might think to myself, okay, if I am tired after Sunday nonetheless, how can I plan my Monday accordingly? Maybe I will work from home on Mondays because I know my weekends have a lot of social activity. If I've got something on Wednesday, I've got a big presentation, a big meeting, I'll plan my gym trip on Tuesday instead, so that Wednesday I don't have to smoosh all of that into one day and get really overwhelmed. So if I know my sensory triggers are, busy social interactions, overstimulating and noisy environments, and I find public speaking really anxiety provoking, then I'm going to cushion time around those events to make sure that I have time to recover in between them and rest both emotionally and physically, and also from sensory stimuli. So I think that's a good approach. Look at it like a weather report, think ahead, plan your week accordingly, and try not to double up as much as possible. If you know you have something triggering one day, try to make that the triggering thing. If you can't avoid another triggering thing, if you got to get the train to your meeting to give your presentation and the train's also overstimulating, make sure you have your headphones, make sure you're protecting yourself in any way that you can.
And I think the nip it in the bud, which is the correct way, people say nip it in the butt sometimes, I feel like kicking them in the butt. But I think that what's interesting is, if you nip it in the bud, have you waited too long, right? So, the ideas of having these issues, and as you quite rightly pointed out, it comes down, and this is the same having an autistic kid, it comes down to actually understanding that for people who are classed as the most inflexible people on the planet, we are forced to be crazy flexible with what we do and don't do each day and week to week to navigate what's coming up. So and that comes down to expectations. And of course, I could be a dad, but I could also be a husband. So what I might achieve this week, I might not be able to do next week because I have to have saved the space or the energy or the room for some other things coming up. Or being able to be present for my kid's birthday party on the weekend means that, say, on Sunday, I was a psychopath basically, but also I was unable to achieve much, right? So, I find this a fascinating thing, Beth. So what we're saying is autistic people aren't very good with change, need routine and structure, but we're saying predict what's going to trigger you and what's going to dysregulate you and make changes. Do you see the issue there? I think it's the perfect advice, but you see the issue there for, when we try to reach certain autistic people, that might be the first barrier that comes up that they've got to try and get over.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of us, for many of us, part of that perceived rigidity and reliance on structure actually comes from knowing that these environments are not as welcoming to us as they are to everyone. And we actually need to have protective structures in place to be okay in those environments. It can be really difficult changing routines. It can be really overwhelming. It can create executive functioning overwhelm and all sorts of things. But I think if we can try to see, the big picture as I can get really overwhelmed unexpectedly in these moments, and then I'm going to have to find a way to cope, because there's nothing worse than being in a public space and you can feel that you're about to have a meltdown or a shutdown, and you have to find a way to manage that, cope with that, escape from that. It's exhausting. And you're, like we said, you're kind of in blue screen of death mode a little bit. So it's really hard to plan. Like if I'm in the city and I start having a meltdown, that's my worst nightmare. The demands on executive functioning to get me out of that situation when I'm already tipped over the edge, it's just, I'm not going to be okay. I'm going to be really tired for a long time after that. So I try to see it like proactively, like anticipate what could cause that to happen and just plan accordingly.
I'm just asking you personally, like, do you think, is it just me, or do you think this is what's hard for autistic people, navigating this with your partner who might think you're inconsistently good at being a partner, right? Or an employer who might think you're inconsistently good at being an employer, because as it was said, there are, some weeks you have to take things and put them on the bench so you can achieve other things. So there's this inconsistency, which, the story I'm telling myself in my mind is that I'm just a regular failure. Like I'm not always living up to the expectations of others, and that makes me the failure. Is that just me, or is that something you understand where I'm coming from?
Oh, absolutely. And I really wish I could credit this quote, because I do not remember where I saw it. It wasn't a research quote, but it just resonated so strongly with me. It was this idea that, the average neurodivergent person in the workplace, we often talk about like needing to find an optimal outcome. So if we get a work project, we're going to work so hard on it. We're going to get really hyper focused. We're going to do this really amazing project. And we assume that our neurotypical counterparts are working that same way with that level of intensity every day for their 8 hours in the office. And that's just not the case. They're taking breaks, they're getting coffees, they're having lunch, they're building social connections, they're, spending some time probably flicking through Facebook on a break, and, they're not working straight through the way that a lot of us.
Facebook on a break?
It's like unfathomable, right? So I think the quote that I found really interesting was, we shouldn't feel like we need to give 100% of the time, because our 100% doesn't look like a neurotypical person's 100%. We have different ways of giving 100%. Ours is quite intense and quite taxing. And it's actually okay to put in your 100% for a couple of hours a day and get really focused on what you're doing, and then be a little bit more regulated throughout the day. So I think it's kind of a balance. Like, we need to recognize that our expectations of ourselves are not aligned to the neurotypical culture in which we are operating. And so that's going to place demands on us that other people aren't facing. And that can be really hard on self-esteem if we feel like we're just not able to do it the way everyone else does. But we also do things they can't do. Like, neurotypical people cannot hyperfocus the way that we can. They don't always have the range of skills that, I mean, we're different. We have different neurotypes. We have different ways of thinking, and that's a strength. You know, we bring diversity into the workplace. So it's hard to navigate that when you're constantly being measured against this neurotypical standard and being told you're not being good at reaching it. But what's your standard for thriving as a neurodivergent person? When do you feel like you've done a great job? What are you great at? Try to assess yourself on that and not the neurotypical standard as much as possible.
But more importantly, even when that's your loved one, placing those upon you, which is hard, but true.
Yeah, it can be really hard to navigate in relationships. I think it requires a lot of really open, honest communication, which can be really challenging. But I think if you have a partner who's open to understanding all of this and open to kind of being neurodiversity affirming in their interactions with you, that can go a long way.
Okay, let's get to another question. This one's from Greg. How do social, emotional pressures and the pressure to mask, to conform to society, impact meltdown, as in frequency and type, compared to sensory challenges and sensitivities? And are they typically greater or lesser for the general autistic population?
I'm so excited about this question. Anytime I get a question.
I'm confused and you're excited.
No, you're reading it out loud and I'm just like, all right, it's time to stem. Like, I'm so excited right now. Anytime there's a mention of masking, I'm like, all right, you've had me hit the info dump button. Like, let's go. So I can talk about this all day. So in terms of how does the pressure of masking relate to emotional pressures and how does this impact meltdowns and shutdowns and sensory challenges? So there's this really, really interesting theory, which I'll talk about, I think, a little bit more later in the video, but I'll just touch on it right now. And it's called the minority stress theory. And there's this amazing autistic academic, Monique Botha, who has argued that autistic people experience something called minority stress. And minority stress is what happens to groups who are minoritized in some way or marginalized or oppressed in society because they experience social structures very differently to the dominant group. And so when they interact with that social structure in their workplace, in their relationship, in their school, in their social lives, they experience stress and anxiety and hardship. And this can come from the structure itself if it's built unequally, but it can also come from the way that people engage. If you're experiencing, you know, whether it's direct or indirect ableism, racism, sexism, this can contribute to minority stress because that's not a comfortable thing to experience. You might need to take on the role of an educator and teach people that what they're doing is harming you, and that's also very stressful. And then you're going to need to find a way to deal with the additional toll on your mental health that the abled, neurotypical, privileged population doesn't have because they're not confronting at least those specific issues in that specific space. So that can lead to mental health challenges, exhaustion, burnout, etc. So how does this all relate to meltdowns? Well, it's a form of stress that autistic people are experiencing. So, you know, if we're being told you're too much, you're too intense, you're too sensitive, we hear that our whole lives, we might start to repress our emotions and repress our needs. And instead of communicating them to other people or being comfortable advocating for our needs, we become fearful that we'll experience discrimination and we hold all of our needs very close to the chest and we don't try to meet them. So that's a form of masking. And we also know, in addition to minority stress causing worse mental health outcomes and physical health outcomes, masking and camouflaging are strongly correlated with anxiety and depression and loss of identity, significant mental health consequences, significant physical health consequences. So if you can imagine the toll that's placing on your well-being, your psychological well-being, your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, you're going to be operating at such a high threshold of stress so much of the time, tipping over to the point of meltdown or shutdown or burnout is going to happen a lot more quickly and frequently for you than it does for people who are operating at this level of threshold because they're not experiencing minority stress. They're not experiencing the pressure to mask and camouflage and the consequences that that has. So if you think about it like a cup, your ability to manage stress might be up to here. And this is actually where it is most of the time, whereas for most people, it might be down here. So if you get tipped over the edge because your bus is late and you're going to be late to work and you have a meltdown, that might partly be because you've been masking and suppressing your own needs and experiencing all of these different forms of stress and the concurrent well-being outcomes.
And you know what's funny is the camouflaging is sensory sensitivities, because Greg talked about the difference between masking and, say, sensory stuff. But technically, camouflaging and masking, that, you know, aren't you you're camouflaging, so you're trying to not show. Trying to be someone who isn't bothered by it, and then masking is like suppressing the being bothered. So it kind of goes hand in hand, but I guess you still wanted to have that conversation with you and see, you know, what autistic people experience more, when, to me, intuitively, it seems like it's kind of hand in hand. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so, you know, a big component of masking and camouflaging can be suppressing distress that's caused by the camouflaging process. So if you think about camouflaging, it's often described as taking on a character. You might wear clothes that you feel uncomfortable in because you know that's what's expected of you in that environment to pass as neurotypical. If those clothes are itching you and they're causing you to feel uncomfortable, that's just one more factor that's filling up the glass higher and higher and higher every day. And I think the other thing that's really important to note here is that many neurodivergent people experience something that we call alexithymia, and this is difficulty with identifying and articulating emotions. And that can sometimes mean we hit that critical mass without seeing the warning signs. I experience this a lot with hunger. So I don't tend to know I'm hungry until my blood sugar's so low that, like, my vision's going black and, like, I'm getting ready to throw up now. So most people, neurotypical people, would start to notice they're hungry way before that. But for me to recognize my physical cues, they have to be so intense. And a lot of people experience that with emotions as well. Even other co-occurring things that can factor in here, there's actually a sleep disorder called narcolepsy that is much more common in neurodivergent people, particularly linked to ADHD. And narcolepsy there's two types of narcolepsy, and one type includes something called cataplexy. And cataplexy is when we experience emotions in such a way that it can trigger either a partial or a full body paralysis that we would experience in sleep, because narcolepsy is a disorder of the REM sleep cycle. And so people who experience cataplexy can actually have really intense physical reactions to emotions, and that might look like part of their face drooping, but that might look like just collapsing. So there's all sorts of ways that emotional regulation can be impacted by neurodivergence. You can imagine how difficult it would be to live a regular life if the prospect of being confronted with emotions could literally make you collapse. And there are a lot of things that people can do to kind of try to engage with their emotions a little bit more to prevent the spillover with meltdowns and shutdowns and burnouts. You know, we talked in a previous video about masking. We talked about journaling, using AI. But I think, you know, overall, it really comes back to what we were speaking about just earlier, that we're told all the time we're too intense, too sensitive, too much. And oftentimes we can learn to suppress and ignore and avoid our emotions as a result of that. So tying into that unmasking, it's, you know, part of it's going to be acknowledging that we have emotions, they're okay. Emotions aren't illogical. In fact, behaving in a logical way requires understanding our emotions and factoring them in when we choose our behaviors, because our emotions and our emotional well-being is one of the most significant indicators of our quality of life. So it's a bit of a nuanced answer for you, Orion.
This is the reverse, because I'm now going to give you two questions at once.
Oh, gosh.
I'm not going to, just so you know, I'm not going to edit it so you hear my voice twice. I'm going to do them separately. But let's. What I'll do is I'll say the first question, then I'll tell you I'm going to do the second question, and then you can just tackle them together. Okay, so here we go. Hannibal Nectar asks, does burnout occur at around the same frequency across genders? do autistic women tend to experience a greater sense of identity confusion or crisis due to their increased tendency to mask in social situations? So that's Hannibal Nectar. And the next question is from Kelly Madigan. And this is, do all autistic individuals experience long-lasting, debilitating burnout, causing loss of skills and ability to function like they once did for weeks, months, or years, like long periods of time? Which is a great question as well.
Yeah, both great questions. And I think, I mentioned earlier, so the field of burnout research is very, very young. So we don't have answers to all of these questions yet, but there's some great research happening that's trying to progress towards having those answers. So we don't yet know if all autistic people experience this. That's going to take a while to work out what the prevalence is within the autistic population. And there's a little bit of emerging research on how burnout might link to gender or racialization, for example. But again, it's very, very early. And we're just starting to notice that it's time to ask those questions. So it's going to take a while to answer them. There's 3 researchers that are coming to mind here that are doing great work in this space. So there's Jane Mansalis, who's at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Center in Melbourne, Australia. Dora Raymaker at Portland State University, and then there's Sam Arnold at Western Sydney University. Some of these articles are suggesting perhaps some of the factors that we just associate with what I just referred to as minority stress. So for example, being a woman or being a gender minority, being racialized or negatively racialized in society may contribute to the likelihood of experiencing burnout. So it's likely that if you experience minority stress in several domains of your life, that's going to increase that load and that threshold that we talked about. And it's probably more likely that you're going to experience enough compounding minority stress load from these different identities that you may be more likely. It may happen more quickly, more regularly, that you spill over. We don't have the research showing this yet, but that's probably the direction it's going to head in.
Which makes logical sense, obviously, if it piles up on top of each other. You're going through all the different facets of where you can, be viewed on as different or.
And to be clear, like I'm suggesting this, I think as a researcher, it's really important to clarify. I'm suggesting this having read a variety of papers on different topics. And, this paper on minority stress in autistic people might not specifically discuss burnout, but I can see that it's relevant to the burnout literature. And I can see that at some point it's likely these fields are going to create some findings that are along those lines.
Is it even really recognized, or like, that's the thing, right? Are we just going with this, or is it something that's more broadly understood and recognized academically, or is burnout still a thing we're looking into?
I think, look, academically, most things are things we are looking into. We just find ways of contributing more evidence to support a theory. But at the end of the day, they're theories, they're nuanced. There's always going to be more information coming forward, other critiques that might challenge that point of view. In terms of burnout, it is a young field, but there is very strong evidence-based research demonstrating that autistic people have this unique experience of burnout that is not the same as depression. And there is research showing what some of the factors leading to burnout are. So, those researchers I mentioned before, Dr. Arnold, Dr. Mansalis, Dr. Raymaker, their research is making a very convincing case for autistic burnout as something distinct from depression that many autistic people experience that has distinct biopsychosocial causes. And I know that's a big complicated word. It's basically just saying that the way your biology, your body interacts with the social world and how this impacts your internal psychology, all of those factors are going to contribute to burnout. It's not likely just biological or just social or just psychological. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's definitely something I experience and have experienced, and putting it aside to other types of mental health conditions, I would also say that I think it feels so much different to, say, a neurotypical employee that goes, I'm really burnt out after this week at work. I dig that's true and I believe them, but that's not how I feel when I feel like I'm burnt out. Like I feel completely,
Yeah.
non-functional, as in I don't have what it takes to do what I need to do, even the good stuff. Like I can't even do the good stuff. So, that's where, to me, that's where it's really fascinating, but also still really hard to, I guess, get the neurotypical world to buy in on it. Well, maybe you're just lazy, maybe, so it's a tricky thing to navigate still. Although I know we all know we experience it without really even talking about it. We all just, can see when another autistic person is clearly, like people well, is in burnout or is experiencing that kind of thing. So it's like a reality to us, but still just adds to the list of things that the neurotypical world is like, maybe, I don't know, which makes it hard.
The other thing Kelly was asking about is whether all autistic people experience burnout as this kind of debilitating loss of skills and function that they had previously had. And so again, we don't have clear data showing yet everybody experiences this, but we do have evidence that many autistic people experience burnout in this fashion. I've experienced several periods of burnout in my life, and they're very distinct, like you said, Orion, from that neurotypical version of burnout, which is just, it's been a big week, I'm going to have to rest this weekend. When I've experienced burnout, and I'm coming out of a period of burnout in the last few months, I've started coming out of it. I was very, very burnt out for most of last year because the environment that I was in was very stressful as an autistic person. I was experiencing a lot of really challenging things, including, some ableism in places that I wasn't able to avoid. And that caused a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, and kind of got to the point where I started realizing, I'm not able to switch off. I'm home in the evening and I'm not able to sit and watch a TV show because I'm feeling really anxious. I don't feel like I can switch off. I'm not feeling like I can regulate myself. I start having more meltdowns and more shutdowns. It's a lot more difficult for me to cope with external stimuli than it usually is. I'm needing to sleep a lot more. I'm needing to rest a lot more. I'm really having a hard time. Like I'll start, and one of the biggest triggers, or not the trigger, but like an indication, a red flag for me that I'm like creeping towards burnout, is I'll be getting messages from friends who I want to see and I miss them and I really want to hear from them. But even having the demand of like answering a message just seems like so overwhelming. I just cannot bring myself to do it because it's going to create another demand. Because if I answer a message, there's another message. And then eventually there's an invitation to meet up, and I'm going to have to go through the whole process and all the stress of meeting up. And it just feels like too much. So in terms of loss of skills like that, it can look like loss of ability to maintain relationships and friendships the way that a person usually would. I also find it really impacts me in terms of managing my household. So I really enjoy cooking. I like the creativity. I grew up in an Italian Canadian family, and it's like a huge part of who I am and my culture. But when I'm in burnout, the executive functioning demands of cooking are just not possible for me. It's very overwhelming. So I end up having to rely on services that deliver pre-prepared frozen meals because I just don't have the capacity to think about food anymore. I have difficulty with physical exertion. So going to the gym is just overwhelming, overstimulating. The physical fatigue that I feel is enormous. It can be a lot. And what I've found is when coming out of burnout, I really need to get in there early when I know that it's happening and put things in place, because the burnout that I've experienced in the last year is probably one of the worst I've had in my life. And it just went on for probably at least 12 months. Getting in there early if I notice that I'm getting a bit tired or I'm starting to avoid answering messages, giving myself a couple weeks of just, all right, I might still go to work, but I'm not going to do anything else. I'm going to get that meal delivery service. I'm going to do everything I can to try to rest as much as I can and recover and be okay. The other interesting thing burnout can look like is a change in the way that you mask. So for a long time, as a younger person, I masked in a very, very feminine way. I had like the really blonde hair, and I'd wake up every day and I would use my curler, my straightener. I'd put on a full face of makeup, and I was really feminine. I would dress feminine. I would cope with being overstimulated with my clothes. And at some point, I just couldn't anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I kind of developed this new mask as like kind of a hippie, so I could wear like looser clothes and I didn't have to wear makeup anymore. And like I couldn't work full time. And so I was just like, I don't want to be a slave to the capitalist patriarchy, man. And like, I mean, low key, I still feel that way. I do have a degree in gender studies. But yeah, I kind of just adapted my mask so it was less embarrassing for me, because that affected my self-esteem, not being able to keep up with my peers in my 20s. So it changed the mask that I created for myself. So I'm not sure if this will resonate with anyone else, but I thought it might be useful to just hear my experiences of burnout.
Oh, it will definitely. It will 100% resonate with people. I guarantee it. It's actually a really important thing to share, and I think it will actually help a lot of autistic adults. I guarantee it. And what fascinated me too was you mentioned coming out of it. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Burnout doesn't start and stop, right? But that's what you would assume it does, because that's what everything does, right? And when you mention that, I automatically thought, yeah, that's exactly how it feels. People might go, oh, you're really burnt out, aren't you, right now? And it's like, yeah, but then it's like, how are you going with your burnout? I'm getting there. It's like I'm coming out of it. I'm getting there. But I fall into the trap of when I start to feel it again when I start to feel a bit better again, I go, right, I'm going to record 8 videos today, right? and that's not a joke, by the way.
That is a canon event. No, Ryan, that is a canon autistic event. Like, yeah. I've been there.
So obviously, I'm glad you said it. And just quickly, I just want to can you just quickly talk a bit more about the progressing out of, as in it doesn't start and it doesn't stop, and what's the best way, of progressing out of it? Because you could be burnt out for a year, but then it finishes and that's that. But no, there's that kind of a bit like a hangover in a way.
Mm-hmm.
There's that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know why my brain has gone down this particular path, but the kind of metaphor I'm coming up with is burnout. I think of it almost like a garden, like it's part of the land that I live on. It's just part of my life. And I can tend to that garden and make sure I'm weeding it and make sure I'm watering it and make sure I'm giving it the nurture and care that it needs. And if it's a 45-degree, I mean, we live in Australia, we got 45-degree days, but if it's a 45-degree sunny day, I'm going to make sure I put the blinds down on the external balcony and shield the plants from the heat a little bit. Or if you want the Canadian metaphor, you're not going to leave your plants out in the snow. You've got to kind of tend to that. And it sucks because it's another executive functioning demand, and it's another thing, ironically, that can make you more likely to burn out because it's one more thing you have to worry about. But if you see it as part of my day-to-day is managing this burnout, and I can let this burnout become an overgrown garden full of weeds that I'm neglecting, and it's this huge chore, and it's not going to just be I go out there and water the plants and pick 1 or 2 weeds. Now it's going to take me months to clean this up, right? If you try to get in there and take care of it as much as you can, prevent it from getting overgrown, it's going to be a lot more feasible or a lot easier to manage that. So if you're already in the thick of it and it's already overgrown, unfortunately, it does take a lot of work to get out of it. The work is mostly rest, which is the one saving grace in all of this. In a day-to-day, just try to see it like a garden. You've got to try to maintain it. And it is absolutely okay to have needs. I think so many neurodivergent and autistic people need to hear this. It is okay to have needs. It is okay to need quiet time. It is okay to need to come home from work and just put on your house coat and spend some time alone. It is okay to have these needs, and it's complicated to manage in a relationship or in a marriage and with your friendships, and it requires balance, but it's okay to have needs. You don't need to put the needs of other people over yourself all the time. That is going to make you burn out, and ultimately it's going to mean you can't meet their needs at all because you're not even able to meet your own needs enough to function. So balance your own needs with other people's needs. It's okay to have them. You're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not too intense. You're just a human being, and it's okay.
And frankly, aside from exceptions, if you're having burnouts regularly and you don't think they're getting, lesser in duration, maybe larger in duration, then you're ignoring everything you're supposed to be taking notice of and doing. So I know there's exceptions, but as a rule, the more and more I get to know myself and my triggers, the more I feel like I can see where burnout could occur, and I will experience it, but I'm somehow able to shrink it down. So, for example, I know that when the summer school holidays start, by the end of the summer school holidays and the kids get back to school, I can't just start working. Like I'm completely, I'm parented out, but I'm able to get myself back into it more by mitigating those, by working together with my wife during the summer holidays and, doing breaks and different things. And you've got to actually start to listen to yourself, and you've actually got to start to do things that are right for yourself. And I know that's hard because we have no value in ourselves as a rule. So, it's tricky. I get it. But I think everything you've said is just absolutely, prime advice. All right, brilliant work. Thank you so much for answering all those questions, Dr. Beth. And we will answer some more on another video soon.
Really looking forward to it. And for anyone who noticed last time that my fidget toy matched Orion's shirt, that was an accident. But this week, we went with a jungle theme, and we've done it again. So if you have suggestions for themes, let us know, and we will coordinate.
The shirts and everything. It's astounding. Okay, so aside from attire and matching stimming tools and toys, do you have a question you'd like to ask Dr. Beth? Put it in the comments below. And if you're looking for even more real-life conversations with real autistic people just like you and me, check out my collaborations playlist.